Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookish From, and I am back with another video. I decided to make it a little tie-dye and fun because why not? So we are here today with another long wrap-up. It is what it is. It's just a part of the nature of my channel where my wrap-ups are just extremely long, and I enjoy filming them. I don't have the capacity to do the reviews every single week, so we're just gonna stick with the mid-month and the end of the month. And you know, if I read a lot, I read a lot. It is what it is. So before we get started with this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Book of the Month. So thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. If you didn't know, Book of the Month is a fast growing and super popular online book service for readers. Their mission is to promote new and emerging authors and help readers discover books that they love. One thing that I always say, and I promise you, if I ever talk about Book of the Month, I will always say that I absolutely love the fact that they are diverse in their authors as well as the genres that they include every single month. There is a little bit of something for everyone. So the way that Book of the Month works is that every month their team spends time vetting through hundreds of books, and they give their readers a curated selection of newly released and early release titles. So when I say early release, that does mean that during the month there are opportunities to acquire books before they actually release. And this whole entire concept is perfect because it gives readers the opportunity to spend more time reading and less time researching and looking for their next read. So Book of the Month is also risk-free. You can skip any month at any time and you will not be charged for that month. And they have the best prices for newly released hardcovers. I don't know about y'all, but hardcovers are super expensive. They will always be super expensive, but Book of the Month makes them affordable. So traditionally it is $14.99 a month. However, today I have a special code that you could use to get your first book for $9.99, and the code for the month of March is BOOKBUD, and I will make sure that I leave that information as well as the link to Book of the Month down in the description box below. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the books. Every month your books will come in this blue Book of the Month box. So the first book that I see here is the final revival of Opal and Nev by Donny Walton, and this is a early release title. This does not come out until the end of the month. It focuses on two characters. One character by the name of Opal, who grows up in Detroit, and she ends up partnering up with the other character Nev, and they become this huge band in the 1970s. Interestingly enough, another band decides to use the Confederate flag. It's another band that's signed to the same label as them, and of course Opal decides to protest against it, and it has repercussions. And then it fast forwards into time in 2016 where Opal and Nev decide to have a reunion, and then some dark secrets come out. So this is told in an oral history format, which for me as a librarian is very interested, and I'm extremely excited to see how this is going to be formatted and what the storytelling is going to look like. The most beautiful cover of the month definitely ends up going to The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. This is a book that takes place in the late 1700s. It's about a woman who runs an apothecary where women can buy poisons to use against abusive men. There's a couple of catches to that, meaning that the women are not allowed to use these poisons against other women. They also have to leave their information in the registry. Our main character ends up coming across a young 12-year-old girl, and there are some consequences associated with that friendship. This sounds like it's going to be pretty dark, but I mean, this cover though, the cover. The next one that I have here appears to be a thriller, and this is Too Good to Be True by Carola Lovering. And this is about a young woman by the name of Sky who is really excited to be engaged to this man by the name of Bert. Unfortunately, as she finds letters that he has written to his therapist, she finds out that he's already married. And as she continues to plan for the wedding, he continues to scheme. And then there is a third storyline that's added that takes place, I believe, 30 years prior to these events, where it's about another young woman who was trying to get out of a situation involving Burke. So this one sounds intense, but it sounds like it also is going to be really good. The next one that I have here is In a Book Club Far Away by Tiff Marcello, and this is about 3 women who end up becoming close friends because they're all living or stationed at the same place, which I believe is Fort East, and they continue to bond and get to know each other through a book club, and then all of that ends because someone has committed some huge act of betrayal. So we fast forward in the book where we see the women start to reunite and pick up the pieces of where they have come from. I think this is going to be one that definitely focuses on friendship, especially when one of the women basically is calling on them to help her because her husband is not around to help her with her daughter. So I think we're going to get the opportunity to see them rebuild and repair their friendship. This one is also an early release title that does not come out until April. And the last one in this month's selection is What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coaster. And this one is about a story surrounding integration. It takes place in Piedmont, North Carolina, where there are Black students that are being bused to a predominantly white school. To kind of help foster the integration, the school puts on a play in which 2 main characters, G and Nicole, participate, and it ends up twisting and tying their families together in very interesting ways, especially when we look at their relationships with their mothers, who both want the best for them. But I'm sure there are some very, very interesting and probably difficult conversations that happen as a result. All right, y'all, so those are the 5 selections for this month's Book of the Month picks. Remember that if you want to get your first book for $9.99, the code to use this month is BOOKBUD, and I will make sure that I leave that code and the link to Book of the Month down in the description box below. Thank you once again to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Okay, so let's get into the stats part. This is the part that everyone loves and I find very, very interesting, but because this video is already going to be long, let's just go ahead, jump in. Sorry if the light has changed. I'm filming actually like during the day, so the way that the sunlight is operating in addition to like my light it's fun. It's always fun. This month I read a total of 44 things, which came out to 5,687 pages. Now this number is not going to be completely accurate, and the reason why is because I was reading some single issues of comics, and both Goodreads and Storygraph don't always have the page info attached to it. So that number actually is probably going to end up being a little lower than what it actually is. Not significant or anything to change it up, but I think that it is just slightly lower because of the missing page counts and such. This means that I read an average of about 203 pages a day. Know that I read more this month in terms of things, but I have a lower page count because I was reading shorter things. So that's why that kind of looks the way that it looks. Like last month, I think I read over 8,000 pages. This month, I read just over 5,000 pages. And I'm gonna stop saying just because that still is a lot considering what I have going on. But it is lower because I was reading shorter things. This month, I listened to 97 hours and 51 minutes worth of audiobooks. So that's a little over 4 days of straight listening, no breaks. So I didn't listen to as many audiobooks as I did, or the audiobooks weren't as long as they were last month. Flying down to genre, I read 25 graphic novels, manga, or comics. It happened. I read 8 romance books. 8 of them were contemporary, so I didn't read in any other subgenre. I read 6 that I categorize as contemporary literary fiction or realistic fiction, 1 nonfiction, 3 fantasy, and 1 historical fiction. In terms of target audience, I did not do a good job at balancing again this month. It just didn't work out that way. I just didn't do a good job balancing, but I read 1 book targeted at children, 39 were targeted at adults, 2 at a YA audience, and 2 at a middle grade audience. For format, I ended up reading 8 physical books, 24 ebooks, which is not surprising when we talk about what I've read, and 12 audiobooks. So I've been reading a lot digitally lately. I think that is slowly becoming my preferred format, which is very awkward because 2 years ago, like, I hated reading ebooks or digital books. Like, I always wanted physical, and now I'm like, I really like having the ebook. It's just super convenient being a parent. Now, for my sources, this list has now grown exponentially because of the fact that, hey, I am pulling stuff from a lot more different resources than I have in the past. So you're gonna see this list probably be continued for the rest of the year. I didn't notice how extended it had gotten until this month, but 12 were borrowed from the library. 17 books were owned by me off of my TBR. I'm so proud of myself for that. The number is usually a little bit lower, but this month it was super high. I read 3 art to review copies. 1 was checked out from Kindle Unlimited. 1 was checked out from Comixology. 10 were checked out from Marvel Unlimited. 2 were checked out from DC Infinite Unlimited. And 2 I had from Libro FM. I am back on my Libro FM game. If you're interested in joining Libro FM, I have a link down below where you can sign up and get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1. It is $14.99 a month, so it is a great way to support your local bookstores. Very, very awesome work that they are doing. And when I say local bookstores, I mean like indie bookstores. So it really, really helps out indie bookstores, and you can choose exactly what store you want that money to go to. For my additional stats, I did horrible this month. I read 4 books that had main characters that identified as LGBTQIA+. No books were translated this month, which is not good at all. 1 book was a reread. Did not read any books over 500 pages. 25 were written by Black authors, and none of my books had disability rep this month. In terms of star rating, I had 1 that was 2 stars, 1 that was 2.5 stars, 6 that were 3 stars, 5 that were 3.5 stars, 1 that was 3.75 stars, 22 that were 4 stars, 3 that were 4.5 stars, and 5 that were 5 stars, which gave me a monthly average of 3.87. In terms of publication date, I actually did really, really well. I'm gonna stop going through the dates. You can kind of see this on the graph, but you can tell that I ended up reading more backlist this month than frontlist. So I did end up reading 10 books that were published in 2021. But when you think about it in terms of percentages and how many books I read from 2020 and back, even if you were to combine 2021 and 2020 as being more frontlist, I still read at least or close to half of my books were backlist, which is a good spread. There are some outlier numbers there. You see 1983 and 1963. The 1983 book is specifically related to the Tammy Pierce book that I read, and then since I'm reading a lot of Marvel's older stuff, it's gonna be from the 60s. Out of all the books that I read this month, 28 were written by BIPOC authors and 16 were written by white authors. So once again this month, my BIPOC authors are outnumbering my white authors, which is still even super important for me because I read a lot of comics, and comics are very much so dominated by white men. So to see even the fact that even with all of the comics and graphic novels that I read this month, I still was able to stick to predominantly reading BIPOC authors. 22 of the authors that I did end up reading this month were men, and that number is higher than it was last month because of how many comics I was reading. 20 were written by women and 2 were written by non-binary authors. 5 of the authors identify as queer and 39 are unknown or they're not queer. So basically what that means is that there's no information saying whether they are queer or not. They have not said it themselves. I don't ever make assumptions, and I never want to put someone in a position where they would have to out themselves. So that's why that says unknown or they're not queer. So it's one of the 2 for that section. And in terms of where my authors were from, due to a lot of the comic and graphic novels that I was reading, not saying that they don't exist from other places because they definitely do. There's a lot of great translated comics out there that I think I'm going to plan on reading in March. However, this month specifically pulled a lot from the United States, which is why that number is at 40. 1 author came from Canada, 2 came from Nigeria, and 1 came from Sierra Leone. So remember that I'm basing these numbers off of where the author is originally from. They could have moved to another place. They could be living somewhere else by now, but they were born and raised in that country. All right, y'all. So those are the stats. I'm going to tell you the books that I read in the first part of February. I already did all the reviews on this information, which I'll make sure I leave in the card symbol up above, but I will at least show you the covers and the titles, and then we'll get into the reviews for the second half of February. So the first thing I read was Black Buck, No Holds Barred, A Risque Engagement, Tales of Suspense issue number 39, Chlorine Sky, The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 3, The Yellow Wife, The Gilded Ones, The Destroyer issue number 1, Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America, Sweet Perfection, Forks issue number 1, Ephraim Divided, Radiant Black issue number 1, The Culmination of Everything, Lock and Key Dog Days issue number 1, Black Panther King in Black issue number 1. This is actually a one-shot, so is the previous comic. Archie and Katie Keene issue number 1, Fantastic Four issue number 12, and Brave Chef Brianna volume 1, which I think this is just one volume. It's not going any further than that. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is actually Laguardia by Nnedi Okorafor. I wanted to pick this one up because Nnedi Okorafor has definitely been dabbling a lot into the comic world. She's done Laguardia here, which I am going to review, and then she's also done some stuff for Marvel, including Shuri and also some World of Wakanda's type stuff. So I had seen a couple people read this. I know that Deidre had read it, so I thought that I would take the opportunity to read it myself. Now, this is about a Nigerian American doctor by the name of Future, who is currently at the start of this living in Nigeria, and then she makes the decision to up and leave, and she takes an alien plant with her, and the only airport that she can go through is through LaGuardia. And it is very much so an interesting concept of humans and aliens living amongst each other and living peacefully in some areas, and other areas who are pretty pissed off about the fact that the aliens are there living in their spaces. They don't want to work with them. They don't want to have to live around them. And then of course there are advocates, people who want to live amongst the aliens, work side by side with them, advocate for them. And I think this is pretty interesting because it's clear that a lot of what we're seeing in the story parallels a lot of conversations that the globe is having about immigration. At first I thought it was going to be a little bit heavy-handed because we have humans that are facing issues related to immigration within the context of the work, and then also we have these creatures, these aliens. But for me, I think her use, or her double entendre of alien, is super important to the context of this entire story and why it doesn't come off as heavy-handed as one would possibly assume. And of course, you know, we're talking about this actual contemporary element, this contemporary issue that everyone has been talking about for a while, and we're transporting it into a science fiction world, which makes it a little bit of a different scenario. And of course, when Future ends up going back to New York to live with her grandmother, there are some issues that she leaves behind, namely in the form of a man by the name of Citizen, who she has not explained anything to. She doesn't want to tell him why she's left. He doesn't even know until she's actually gone. And there is a whole reason for that. And of course, I can't speak about the reason because of the fact that it will spoil the entire comic for you. This is a mini-series, so usually when a lot of companies do mini-series, essentially what we're looking at here is that we probably are not going to get anything else in this world, which is super disappointing. I hope maybe they decided differently in the future, but for right now I think this is going to be its own self-contained story. I thought it was well written. I thought the art was absolutely gorgeous, so bright and colorful, and very unlike what I thought I was going to get based off of the cover. So the cover, I think in some regard is beautiful. I love it, but I think in terms of art style it can be a little misleading to what you're going to get into the pages, because the art is fabulous. But I did end up giving this one 4 stars. I love what Nnedi Okorafor is doing in comics. It is creating a very important space for Black science fiction and fantasy writers to come in and do more with comics as a medium. We see N.K. Jemisin doing the same thing here with picking up Far Sector. The next book that I ended up reading was 8 by Rilzy Adams. Now, I was very hesitant to pick up this book because I'd read a Rilzy Adams book before. It was a Christmas novella that she had done. I think there's the 12 dates of Christmas, something along those those lines. And I really did not care for her writing of the main character in that one. I did not get along with that character at all. So I was nervous to see how she was going to write other characters, and this was not a disappointment. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It focuses on 2 main characters by the name of Tempest and Russ, and Tempest has just made a big move in her personal life, in her profession, and to celebrate, she decides to hire a private chef for both her and her close friend. Her close friend ends up having to pull out, so it is essentially just her and the private chef, and it goes from there. And I did not know that food could just be so sexy. And it's not the use of food in the way that I think a lot of people are thinking, because I know there are some wild things that can come from a description like that, but it's not that. It's just the atmosphere of having like a food-based romance. I think their chemistry was sparkling as soon as they were in the same room. They connected instantly, and I just like the way that this one flowed. I think Adams displayed a very concise and fluid way of writing that just helps readers connect with the chemistry between our 2 main characters, and it creates this essence of hope for our 2 characters by the end of this book. It is very short. It's only 50 pages, and I actually ended up picking this one up because it went on sale for Valentine's Day, but I enjoyed it, and now it makes me even more excited to dive into Rilzy Adams' works. The next book that I ended up reading was Alanna, the First Adventure. This is the first book in the Song of the Lioness Quartet. I gave this one 5 stars. It was done very well, y'all. To have been written in 1983, this is such a powerful book. I'm very surprised at what I did end up reading, because I thought that it wasn't going to age well, but for the time in which it was written, I feel like Tammy Pierce did an excellent job. This is a book that I ended up buddy reading with Bethany over at Beautifully Bookish Bethany, and we actually did a whole live show discussion on this one. We'll be doing a live show discussion on my channel for the second one on Friday, March 26th, so make sure you're on the lookout for that information. But it focuses on a young girl by the name of Alanna who does not want to go and learn magic. She wants to become a knight, so she ends up switching places with her brother, and she goes to basically go through the training of becoming a knight. I think that one of the greatest things about this is that Tammy acknowledges a couple of things. She acknowledges that even in her young age, Alanna is a flawed character. She is excelling at certain tactical skills that she would need for knighthood, but when she gets to this castle, she doesn't know it all, and she has to work harder than what she expected. And I like that, because it would have been too easy to kind of give her the leg up and then not really have her have to work for anything. I like that Tammy focused on the friendships that Alanna was able to build with these other kids that were there, that were all boys. I like that Tammy didn't ignore puberty as it would happen to Alanna. I think that it would have been easy and also just incorrect to not assume that eventually Alanna's body would start developing in a certain way, that she would end up getting her period, and all of that stuff was addressed, and I think it was addressed in a way that was perfect for those who were reading these books in the time that they came out. They were above and far beyond their time. I also think just Alanna was just a chill character. She was really cool. Anytime someone found out that she was a woman and she had no clothes on, it was like, okay, be cool, be chill. I'm a woman, you know, let's just keep this on the low. She was just fun to read about. This is a quick, fast-paced book. You fly through it like that. I finished it in one day, and it is a great fantasy book, and I think Tammy did an excellent job kind of creating this pathway for women in fantasy. Of course, the conversation surrounding gender should have been a little different, and I think that as Tammy has progressed, she has shown ways in which she has grown. So of course, reading it now, knowing and having conversations about gender. It doesn't read as well, but for the most part, it was a great book. And I will make sure that I leave the discussion between Bethany and myself up in the card symbol above. Okay, so the next one that we have is a comic, and it is Niobe. She is Life issue number 1 by Amandla Stenberg, and this is the same Amandla that you're all used to seeing in the YA adaptations of every book, and they have practically been in everything, so Amandla should be a familiar name, but they have actually helped write a comic book series, and this one is going to be hard to describe. I think anytime that I talk about single issues, they're awfully hard to talk about because of the fact that there's not a lot of content to go off of, and anything that you say can technically be used as a spoiler. So the only thing that I'm going to say about this one is that it focuses on a main character, Niobe, who has some issues with her dad. She appears to be part elf, and her father wants to kill her. Now, it's not revealed as to why. This is something that takes place in the beginning of the issue, so it's not a huge spoiler there, but she ends up going somewhere else, I won't say where, and she connects with these other beings. Now, it's confusing. I think this is one of those comic book series where you read the first issue and you're like, what is going on? So I gave it 3 stars because I thought that the artwork was beautiful. The artwork was gorgeous, but it was like, okay, I don't think I really get what this story is about. So this is one that I think I'm going to have to continue to read in order to learn more about the characters, the plot, and where Amandla and the rest of the creative team behind this actually want to take this story. But it is one that I definitely recommend checking out, but I would probably recommend checking out the actual bind up of the first 4 issues as opposed to reading it issue by issue like me, because don't make my mistakes. Okay, y'all, so this is going to be interesting because I usually just go kind of in more of a consecutive order in which I have read the books whenever I do my wrap-ups. But for some single issues that I've been reading, they're actually tied to this huge event. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to review about 5 or 6 issues just in this one section and take them out of chronological order because they're all interconnected and it would be hard for me to talk about each single issue. I think it's just important for me to talk about them as a whole. If you did not know, I don't know how you don't know at this point, I'm very into comics. And right now, Marvel is having what is called a King in Black event. So this is an event that is affecting a lot of different characters. It is focused on a main character by the name of Null, and Null is the mind behind the symbiote. So the symbiote suit is what you see in some of adaptations of Spider-Man where he's wearing the black suit. If you're familiar with Venom, Venom has a black suit which is attached to the symbiote. Miles Morales has a black suit. So this is an event where Null basically has come back and he's like, it's time for everyone to pay for their crap. So I was really interested in it. I became more familiar with it when I realized that I kept seeing these issues pop up on the website that I follow that kept having the title King in Black, and I was like, what is this? What's going on? Because I wasn't following this specific timeline. This actually goes all the way back to like 2013, so I wasn't super invested per se in this story at first because I didn't even really know what was going on. But then I started seeing more issues. I saw that they were coming out with a Black Panther issue that was tied to King in Black. That was a self-contained story. So I read it and I was like, this is good. I want to know more about this character. So I found a guide, as I do with a lot of stuff. There are a lot of resources out there where you can find guides, and I found a guide that specifically focuses on how to get to the King in Black event. So in order to get to the King in Black event, they recommend reading the stuff for Absolute Carnage, which happens before this, and then there are some issues to read that prepare you for Absolute Carnage. So basically it's like taking 2 steps back, and it's a lot of reading. I'm not reading everything because it would just be too much, but it's a good origin story to figure out why things are happening the way that they're happening in this King in Black event. So the first issue that I read in order to prepare for this was Thor God of Thunder issue number 6. Now this came out in 2013, and this issue actually is one of the most interesting and dynamic comics that I think I have ever read. I did end up giving this one 5 stars. It is a story at its core about this alien race that's on this planet, and everything is pretty much screwed up. There's no water, there's nothing to eat, the sun is basically just dehydrating everything, and we have this one specific alien who is really pissed off, and I would be pissed off too, because he loses everything through the course of this comic. And this, in my assumption, was written by someone who is either interested in being an atheist or just is an atheist themselves, because the conversations about people who are religious, who pray, who believe in God, and still end up in these misfortunate or unfortunate situations does not make sense. Why continue to practice these religious beliefs when they don't benefit you? There is a lot of religious iconography that I can't really specifically talk about because I don't want to spoil it, but at its core and center, the reason why a lot of people say to read this issue is because Noel makes his first appearance in this issue, albeit unnamed. You don't really know that it's him, but he is there. So going from there, I actually transitioned into reading Donny Cates's run of Venom, 2018 run, which is so good. If you're interested in Venom as a character, I have not seen the movie. I don't know if I want to see the movie. I haven't heard good things about Venom, but if you're interested in Venom as a character, I definitely would recommend checking out the Donny Cates run. It's very dark. It explores a lot of dark themes. I ended up reading the first 4 issues of his run of the Venom because of the fact that Venom plays a huge role not only in Absolute Carnage, but also in what's going on in this King in Black event. And he has a symbiote suit, and the reason why we become more aware of what has been going on and the possible return of Noel is because of his relationship, which is Eddie Brock is Venom, and his relationship to his symbiote. His symbiote goes haywire, starts doing some really crazy stuff that it's never done before, even though they seem to have a close relationship. And this specific run gives us a background look and an origin story of Noel and what exactly happened prior to the events of that 2013 issue of Thor God of Thunder. It's a very intriguing process. I should have all 4 covers of the issues that I read here on the screen, and it is an epic thing. It is so epic. I'm not going to go through my specific ratings for any of these because you can find them on Goodreads if you really want to look at them, but I think that most of them got pretty much in between 4 to 5 stars in terms of rating. Artwork was on point, storyline is on point. Miles Morales is within the first 4 issues of this. We get our gruesome look at Noel, and it just seems like the world is about to fall apart because this man has come back and said, y'all screwed me over, so now I'm here to screw you all over. Now, in addition to reading those issues of Venom by Donny Cates, I also ended up reading some issues that were not Venom related specifically. So there is another huge character who plays a role in all of this, and that character's name is Carnage, which is where we get the Absolute Carnage name from. Now, I read Web of Venom, and Web of Venom is essentially about Cletus, who is Carnage. And it is his origin story and what happens to him prior to his comeback, his origin, because Cletus is essentially a serial killer, a disgusting serial killer, and there is a cult that's associated with him that helps bring him back to life, and you learn what role Carnage plays in it. I can't tell you, and I don't want to tell you because of the spoilers, but the ending of this is mind-boggling, and to me it was like, this is why it's called Absolute Carnage, and it deals specifically with the symbiote and how the Marvel universe and Marvel characters have come in contact with the symbiote, and that's all that I'm gonna say. But it was mind-boggling. It was mind-blowing. I remember finishing the issue and I got so amped and so excited to finish the rest of the series. And then I also read the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 361. This one was done by David Michelin. I believe that's how you say his last name. And this is just a interesting look at how Spider-Man is tied into all of this nonsense. And this issue specifically looks at the relationship between Carnage and Spider-Man and their interactions and how Spider-Man knows who he is. So that's all I'm going to say about this one, because once again, I don't want to delve too deep into some of these because I don't want to spoil them, just in case anybody's interested in reading them. The next one that I read was JD and the Great Barber Battle. This is by J. Dillard, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. This is a new chapter book series that is being started, so this is more aimed towards children and not middle grade audience. It's about a young boy by the name of JD whose mom gives him a haircut before he goes to school. She jacks his hairline up. I mean, jacks it up. So instead of trying to wait until he can get another haircut, he decides to take matters into his own hands. It is hilarious the tactics and the tools that he tries in order to fix his hair, ultimately using clippers and seeing that he's actually talented with clippers and having this love and passion for cutting hair. I think that this book is just an ode to positive representation of Black hair culture and what things are important to Black people when we talk about hair. And while it may not seem like it's something that's important or significant, it really is for Black kids to be able to see that their hair, their many forms of hair, the way that it looks, the way that we go about getting our hair done, whether that's beauty shop culture, whether that's barbershop culture, it's very, very important to the Black community, and seeing positive representations of it is vital for kids at a young age, because I know, at least for my generation and back, a lot of us did not get that. And it leads to a very, very sticky slope in how we view ourselves as a community. So I love this one. I thought it was well written. The illustrations were perfect. It was just done well. There's a lot of great representation of family because JD lives with his mom and his grandparents. There's great sibling rivalry in some parts, and there's great friendships that are intact here. Now, as an adult reading this book, of course, there were some aspects of it that were just a tad bit unrealistic, but I do know and always remember that I am not the target audience, so this is a great book for children. The second book is coming out sometime this year. I'm going to see if I can try to get my hands on a review copy of that one because it's just so good. It was really, really enjoyable. The next thing that I ended up reading was Harley Quinn Future State, and this is part of DC's Future State event. Now, Future State should be coming to a close this week or next week. I think there's one last issue that they have to publish, but now they're actually coming out with their Infinite Frontier books, which is a new look at what DC is going to look like in the future. Now, Future State issues for me have been pretty decent so far. I actually read one just the other day that was a miss, a complete miss, but I was very interested in seeing how we were going to get Harley Quinn in Future State. Future State is an event that is happening after Dark Knight Death Metal, which is an event that put the universe on the brink of extinction, and there's a lot that is tied into that. I'm going to go back and prepare myself to read the Dark Knight Death Metal event. However, that's a lot of things that I have to go back and look into with Rebirth, so it's a lot of prep work. So I still wanted to start reading the issues, and for the most part, like, you can start here. You don't have to go back and read the event. You can read a synopsis of the event online if you're that curious, but you don't read the source material. But this is the first issue of the Harley Quinn Future State, and this is intriguing because I think a lot of times when we see Harley Quinn as a character, she's like this goofy, jokey, trickster kind of individual, and we always seem to miss out on the fact that Harley Quinn is a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I can't remember if she's a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Either way, she's a doctor. And we forget that element sometimes because of how she's presented as a character. This goes back to the brilliance of Harley Quinn's mind. And she's put in a situation where she's helping someone, not going to say too much, but she's helping someone capture villains. And the sheer amount of psychology that she has at her hands in order to tell these people, this is exactly how this person operates. If you set this up in this way, I promise you, you'll catch this person. And it's a different side of her that I don't think we always get to see. And I really, really love that. So I'm excited and ready to read the second issue of this. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars. After that, I ended up reading When You Trap a Tiger by Keller. This was the Newbery Award winner for 2021. And it is about a young girl who is trying to figure out who she is. It is very much so a story of identity, and her family, her mom and her sister end up moving into a home with her grandmother Harley. And this is one that was a little different for me in terms of storytelling. This is heavily focused in Korean folk tales and legends and myths, and it is about how storytelling binds us together as families. It helps us pass things on, and at the core of it, it's not a fantasy novel. I think it has fantastical elements, but it's not necessarily a fantasy novel. I think that what it does is it incorporates those elements for a very intentional purpose at the end of the book. But there's a tiger who comes and says that Harmony has stolen something from her, the tiger, and the tiger is saying that I need these things back, and if you get me these things, then Harmony will be better. And it's sad because Lily is really invested in completing this deal. She wants Harmony to get better. She wants her grandmother to just be the grandmother that she's always known. So she's working hard to fill the request of these tigers. And along the way, she makes friends. She learns the importance of friendship, respecting people's differences, and understanding that everyone is not going to be the same as you. She learns a lot about herself. She learns and understands that while she is not the most vocal person, she can still make change. She can still have impact, and she doesn't have to be the loudest person in the room to do that. And listen, I know as a librarian that Newbery Award-winning books are going to tear me up just emotionally. They always do. It seems like anytime a book has won the Newbery Award, you can expect some element of it to be sad. Really, honestly. And this was no different. It really did pull at my heartstrings. And I love the way that Keller talked about ancestry and having this connection with the ancestors, because I know for me, I hear that and I see that a lot in the Black community. So to see it in someone else's culture was just phenomenal and amazing to me, because I think sometimes, even as a person of color, it's difficult to even see outside of your own lens. To know that their family had this high regard and respect to their ancestors and building these connections, these spiritual connections with their ancestors, was something that I, as a Black person, really connected to. And I don't have any Korean ancestry, but it was something that I could understand. So I really, really love this. I ended up giving it 5 stars. Keller wrote this book at a time in which she was trying to come in terms with her own Korean ancestry and heritage, and you can see that across the pages. So if you haven't heard of When You Trap a Tiger, I definitely would recommend checking it out. It was beautiful. It was such a beautiful book. The next book that I ended up reading was The Secret Lives of the Four Wives, also known as The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives. So I ended up reading this one for Blackathon. This was the group pick for Blackathon if you were on that team contemporary literature or nonfiction. And this book was interesting. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I did not think I was gonna like it, because when you start off, you learn about Baba Segi, and he has 4 wives. He's a practicing polygamous. He comes off as extremely arrogant, overbearing, doesn't seem like he's a fun person to be around, comes off as being really just uneducated and stupid and backwards, quote unquote. But my friends, this book is not what it appears to be at all. It is so interesting, and I really enjoyed it. When you go through the process of getting to know the 4 wives, you see reasons why they ended up in this relationship, and you see reasons why they do the things that they do. And things really seem to start to unravel when the last wife joins, and her name is Balanli, and she is really sweet. She's educated, but the other wives are not having it. They're not having it. And it is in their attempt to destroy her and through their narratives that we really find out the heart and core of this story. And when you get to that twist at the end, it was like, I didn't see that coming. And you start to feel as though these characters are all morally gray, except for Alanna. She, to me, was the catalyst that got everything in motion. She's been through a lot, and I think that with her we see a lot of conversations about familial relationships, especially mother-daughter relationships, but everyone else was morally gray. And by the time that you finish this book, you low-key feel sorry for Baba Segi. You really do. You low-key like, dang, man, I feel for you, bro. Like, that's awful. So it's a novel where it starts off giving you this perception and then it ends up changing towards the end. And I think that's ingenious because it's almost like when you encounter people, you have these perceptions of people that you don't know. You only see how they behave on the outside, but you don't know what's going on the inside of their houses. And when you figure out stuff, it's like you build a sense of empathy, even for the wives who are just completely just awful to some regard. You learn their backstory and you're like, dang, like that's rough. That's why you function the way that you function. This is why you behave the way that you behave. So it just was a very complex story, a very intriguing story, and I'm very much so, if you can't tell, I'm tiptoeing around this book because I feel like any one element in talking about this book, describing this book, trying to give you some type of characterization or information about the plot can potentially be a spoiler, and I don't want to do that, so I am tiptoeing around what it is. It's very, very great writing, very, very interesting way of storytelling, and I will just say when you go into this book, nothing is ever what it seems. So while you may feel some type of way towards people, you may disagree with behaviors and thoughts and how people function, let the story tell itself and then make judgments when you get to the end of it. After that, I ended up reading Let Me Please. This is the final book in the McLean Brothers series by Alexandria House. I absolutely love this one. I am actually not going to really talk about this when I review it because I've already done a review of this. It's not on this channel. It's on the Now That's What I Call Black Love channel, which is a channel that was created by Deidre over at Shade Tree Reads and myself, and it's a channel that specifically focuses on black love romance and all its different varieties and forms. So if you want to know more about my thoughts about this specific book, make sure you check out that review. I'll leave it linked in the card symbol above, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I then read another comic, and this is the other history of the DC universe. This was written by John Ridley, who is the same writer of 12 Years a Slave. This is part of DC's Black Label line. I'm not going to get into what the Black Label line is. I'm sure y'all are tired of me getting into the nuanced conversations about comics, but this is one that I decided to pick up because it focuses on marginalized characters that don't get as much play or as much respect within the confines of the DC universe. So there are diverse characters in the DC universe, but I don't think we really see them as much as we should. They're not talked about as much as we should talk about them. And this specific one, it's 2 books, and I had referred to these as issues, but they're more than a single issue. There's a lot more content. There's a lot more text on page than you would typically get in a single issue, which is why they kind of label them as book 1. So this one is about Black Lightning and his origin story, and his origin story is pretty interesting. I think that most people may be familiar with Black Lightning's origin story, but this for me was particularly important in terms of origin story because we see him go from being this, you know, teacher and, you know, marrying and having a family of his own and then transitioning to becoming Black Lightning. But the conversations in here about what these superheroes are fighting for is probably the most engaging aspect of this entire book. So the conversation really starts when we get some internal monologue about the Justice League, and Superman actually ends up coming to Black Lightning and confronting him in his neighborhood. And Black Lightning is like, if you don't get your white privilege having behind out of my face trying to tell me how to be a superhero when you, Wonder Woman, Batman, and whoever else is in the Justice League don't want to take care of people who are in your own backyard. You're willing to go out into space and have all these galactical battles and fight all of these characters, and there's no limits. But as soon as it comes to taking up a stand in your own neighborhoods, which is what he was doing, how he was battling drug usage in his communities, gang violence, trying to get kids ahead in his community, the Justice League wasn't doing any of that. And it's very interesting because it's true. Whenever we see a lot of the characters, as much as I love them in the DC universe, they're not fighting issues that truly impact the people. They're fighting issues in terms of like galactical problems where there's potential for like the world to be blown up, but then we never get to see the opportunity of them actually working within their community, specifically in the Black community, things that are plaguing the Black community. And Black Lightning was very adamant about saying, it's amazing how they call me a thug and a villain, but you know, here you are, and alien creature, your cousin is here, an alien creature, and everybody's like, yay, we love them because red, white, and blue. You're white, you're presented as white, you wear a red and blue suit. People love that. They feel like you're the epitome of patriotism. And me, the person who's really digging down, doing what I need to do, it's very interesting. He even gets into conversations about the first official Black DC character, which was a character that was a member of the Green Lantern Corps, and how that kind of played out and how that wasn't always a great situation. There's some conversations about him working with Batman, and then we have like how some individuals had been othered, and there were specific group, I believe, where it's like Batman and the Outsiders, and he's a part of that group, and how these people were ostracized because they were different. It just really challenges why comics are so white. And even when comics are not 100% white, where they're inserting marginalized groups, it's not always handled in a way in which people can relate to it. So a lot of people who have reviewed this has said, like myself, you don't know that you need this until you read it, because the conversations in this are phenomenal, and I cannot wait to get to the second book. I think John Ridley did an amazing job with this. It definitely explores some important conversations, and I don't know if I said it or not, but if I did, I gave it 5 stars. For that, I ended up reading Bingo Love Jackpot Edition. This is by T. Franklin. This has a bunch of other authors attached to it because of the fact that there's some stuff that is included in the back. So the actual story itself is not that long, and my edition is only 92 pages, but then the last part of this are all these short reimaginings or fill-ins for what could have happened, and then the very last story was supposed to be an insight to the spinoff, which we were supposed to get, which is Bingo Love Volume 2 at Dear Diary. And I don't think that's ever going to happen, y'all. I don't think T. Franklin is ever going to write that second volume. That volume was supposed to come out almost a year ago now. I haven't heard any word from it about it. T. Franklin is not saying anything on her Instagram about it, so or her Twitter about it. So yeah, but if you didn't know, Bingo Love is about 2 Black women who fall in love as children in the 60s, and they cannot be together, so they go through their lives just living their separate lives, and they both get married, they have children, and then they come into contact with each other again. And it's a beautiful story. It is done wonderfully. The art is beautiful. I think that this is a great example of positive Black queer women being represented in comic form, and I really wish T. Franklin would do the second volume, but like I said, I just don't think that we're possibly going to get this. I did end up reading this one for Blackathon. Technically, I only had to read this for Blackathon, and it would have counted for everything because this is a book about a journey of 2 characters. It is a book that follows characters throughout their entire lives. It is a book that features 2 queer characters, and it is a book that is by a disabled Black author. So I could have just read this and called it a day, but of course I didn't. So one book that I did end up skipping that I did read for Blackathon was Treasure by Rebekah Weatherspoon. And for this one, I ended up giving it 3 stars, not 3 stories, 3 stars. And it focuses on 2 characters by the name of Alexis and Trisha. And Alexis ends up meeting Trisha as Treasure, who is a stripper sex worker. So this has positive sex worker representation in it, which I did appreciate. And Rebekah Weatherspoon definitely does acknowledge that in the beginning of the book. But Treasure and I'm gonna call her Trisha. Trisha and Alexis end up meeting that night, and they don't think that they're ever gonna see each other again. There's clearly some chemistry between the two of them, but it is one of those situations where Treasure is doing her job, Trisha is doing her job. I'm gonna have trouble floating between the two names, but Trisha is doing her job, so it's one of those situations where it's like there's some chemistry there, but at the end of the day, I am doing my job. They end up running into each other again because they're both taking a class on computer science, and they end up hanging out a lot. And clearly, Alexis is coming into the relationship with some issues and some things that she's been battling, but they start off as friends, become a little bit more, so this is definitely friends to lovers. I had a couple of issues with this one. I think that I really enjoyed the positive sex work representation. I think that I enjoyed the two of them as characters to some degree, but there was a lot of things that I think Rebekah missed out on that could have been developed better. I think that the pacing was completely off. I think the ending was rushed. We are dealing with a parent who clearly has an issue with Alexis's gender expression, with Alexis's sexuality. He is not really okay with that. So there's a conflict that happens that I think in reality wouldn't have been resolved the way that Rebekah wrote it to be resolved. So that came off kind of awkward. There is a scene in which there's some heavy petting going on in a room. Granted, not visibly, but it's happening in a room where they're babysitting. The kids don't see anything, but it was just kind of an awkward feeling reading that scene. I didn't really care for it myself. And then there was this conversation that could have happened about Black women or women of color in STEM. They're both in computer science classes. It's a class is dominated by men, specifically white men. And there's a little bit of bullying that goes on by a male character in regard to 2 women being in a class that is about computer science and the opportunities that they get because of them being in a computer science class and being women of color to Black women. So there were just some elements that I think could have been expanded. I think some things could have been tied up a little bit better, and it just was not the best book for me. It wasn't bad, but it also was not the best, it was middle of the road, which is why I ended up giving it 3 stars. I think I want to check out more of her work because this is one of her earlier works, so I'm sure she's developed as a writer, so I'm not going to hold this against her in the sense like, oh, I'm never going to read anything by her again, but I think I'm going to check out some of her newer stuff and see where that takes me. Next, I ended up reading 2 issues of Naomi, and this is part of DC's Wonder Comics. This is a imprint that was started by Bendis, who is attempting to introduce some fresh storylines and introduce some new characters to the DC universe. Naomi is one of these characters. I just saw a Black girl on the cover and saw that it was written by David Walker, who also did Bitterroot, who's a Black comic writer, and I was like, that's all you had to say less. So I ended up reading issue number 1 and issue number 2, and the first issue I enjoyed, the second one not so much. I think that the artwork is beautiful. I mean, even the close-ups of our characters is just absolutely beautiful. I think the storyline has some potential. It's about Superman making a sighting in this small town where nothing really ends up happening, and everybody's super excited about it. Naomi's like, oh, I missed it, what exactly happened? And then there's this conversation about the fact that this is not the first time that a superhero has made an appearance within their town. So Naomi's trying to figure out exactly what is going on on what happened, and she's an adopted child, so she has some questions for her parents, and it kind of goes from there. The pacing was a little off for me in that second issue. That's why I didn't rate it as high. I gave the first issue 4 stars, the second one 3.5 stars. But I think that this story definitely has potential. I think they've already wrapped this one and titled it season 1, so hopefully we'll be getting more issues of this one going into 2021 or the rest of 2021. But if you're looking for a new character to check out in the DC universe, I definitely would recommend checking this series out. After that, I ended up reading Ties That Tether by Igharo, and this one is one that I'm gonna have difficulty talking about because I don't want to say much about it, in a sense that some people consider a lot of elements of this book to be spoilers. There's one specific element that I don't consider to be a spoiler because of the fact that I think that it was done so early in the book that it's kind of hard not to talk about it, because it is the driving force of the whole book. It really is. It is the driving force of this entire book. So while I won't talk about that, I can talk a little bit about what I did not like about this book and why I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. So it's essentially about a character by the name of Azire, and she is living in Canada with her mom, and we had these conversations about dating and culture and how her family wanted her to remain true to their culture and marry a Nigerian man. However, she ends up meeting another guy named Raphael who clearly is not Nigerian, and things go from there. I did like the discussions about culture and how we have these traditions that we want to keep, and sometimes we have to figure out where do we draw the line in keeping traditions and following our hearts and what we want to do, and how that impacts relationships, especially to people who come from not necessarily just two racial backgrounds, but I mean, when we start digging into cultural traditions, how does that affect a relationship? However, I did not like the relationship in this book, y'all, at all. I don't think they had any chemistry. It was very awkward. I feel like they had a one-night stand. They were put into this position, and because of a specific element that was used as the driving force of this book, it did not work for their relationship. It was childish in a lot of ways. I think that Raphael was very, very unfair to Azire because of the fact that he was pushing her, you need to communicate, and then when she challenged him in the same way, he wouldn't do it. He was holding her to a different standard that I just did not agree with, that I did not like. There were elements in this book, specifically at the end, that I did not understand what the author's intention was behind it, and I think it was because it was specifically an experience that I had gone through, and I was like, well, maybe there's a conversation that she's trying to have with this, and then there was no conversation that was had, so then I didn't get why it was there. It just did not work. It didn't work. I think if the specific element that I don't want to speak on because it's not technically in the description, I think that if that had not been the driving force of this book, I think we could have gotten better character development out of our two main characters. But because it was a driving force, their relationship just didn't feel right. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel realistic. They didn't have any chemistry. There was somebody who was thrown into this as a part of a love triangle, and I'm like, but why? Like, what's the love triangle for? Clearly it serves no purpose. I don't know if this was supposed to be saying like this is what your life would be like if you married someone that also identified as Nigerian. I don't know. I didn't get it. I didn't get that part. It's not the cultural aspect. The cultural aspect of it was on point. She did a very, very nice job with that. I absolutely adored what she did with that part. It is the characterization, the relationship, the chemistry, the romance. Where was it? Because I didn't find it. So I really genuinely just did not absolutely care for this book. Like I said, I gave it 2.5 stars. Not my cup of tea. I don't know whether I will pick up anything by this author in the future. I will have to see, depending upon what the driving force is in those books. But this had so much potential, and I just don't think that that potential was necessarily reached. After that, I read Aquaman issue number 1. This is the Future State edition of Aquaman, which I ended up giving 4 stars to. It was absolutely great. We are focusing on 2 different characters as Aquaman and Aquawoman, and I can't really say much about it except that we have some world traveling that goes on in this, and it puts them in a very interesting situation. I would just say this: Jackson and Andy make a very, very good pair. I think Jackson and Andy have a great relationship that makes their connection as Aquaman and Aquawoman very, very unique, and I like it. And everybody's not a fan of Aquaman. Aquaman is one of like those ostracized characters in DC. It's the man who talks to fish. I mean, like, how boss can you get? I know that everybody, when they think of Aquaman, thinks about Jason Momoa, but if we're talking about comic books, Aquaman is not Jason Momoa, okay? Like, that's not what Aquaman has looked like. Jason Momoa brought a flair and a beauty to Aquaman that has not always been there in the comics. So to see a different Aquaman and a different Aquawoman that I think are going to be a powerful driving force in this new idea that DC is working with was really, really great. Aquaman is black. We have a black writer writing this story. It's chef's kiss. It's absolutely perfect. And the last thing that I read in February was the first book in the Inheritance trilogy, which is The 100,000 Kingdoms. It was so good, y'all. it was so good. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. It's my first N.K. Jemisin book. I finally did it. I've been talking about this since August of last year. Finally, February of 2021, I read the first book. It was excellent, so well written, so much great world building and character development. I love the usage of what I think is morally great characters where no one is technically good, no one is technically bad. It is about a young woman who is part of this group, the Arameri, and she kind of doesn't have a connection to them because her mother ended up marrying someone that her family didn't want her to marry. She ended up having a child, so she's brought back to the Sky Kingdom in order to engage in some type of fight for the throne that her grandfather is setting up. And instantaneously we should know no one can be trusted. You trust no one. You trust absolutely no one. And then we have these figures, these gods and goddesses who are part of the story, who are trapped under the power of the Arameri, where they are supposed to obey them and do what they ask them to do. They train to be very careful about what they ask the gods and goddesses to do, but they want to be free. They want to be out, and our main character is kind of stuck and has to kind of carve out a path of her own. This book was just so complex and so nuanced in the world building. It was just, it's not like anything I've ever read before, to be honest with you. And there were so many different ways that N.K. Jemisin took this story. And I'm not gonna lie, the first chapter or two of this book is very jarring. And for me, I thought, I was like, I'm not gonna like this book. But the more I kept reading, the more I kept understanding about the character development and where she was going with the story and how all these pieces and parts work together. When we got our reveals, when we figured out, like, maybe her parents weren't these perfect star-crossed lovers. Maybe there's a little bit more to everybody that we're not seeing. And maybe there's a lot of emotion. This whole concept of love and how love will make you do some really foul stuff. Some really foul stuff. And how people react or how people act when they do things based off emotional connections that they assume that they have to people. It's just a lot of different elements that I think she did a very good job with. There are some questions about technically it is incestuous behavior that exists amongst the gods. When we're talking about godlike beings here and the creation of humanity and everything on a planet, and you know, it comes with the territory. There is some discussion also around sexual assault and pedophilia, which is also quite hard to read. So I definitely would keep that in mind when you are going into this book. But I loved it. I cannot wait to read the rest of the books in this series. I'm excited to read them. I actually was part of a live show that was hosted on Rachel's channel, so I'll make sure I link that live show in the description box above. I would not recommend watching that live show if you don't want to be spoiled, because it's hard to talk about this book without spoilers, because it's just that complex. A lot of books that I read this month are hard to talk about without spoilers. So if you haven't read it, be wary of that. But if you have read it, definitely go check out that conversation and get some of my more in-depth and detailed thoughts. All right, y'all, so that is it. That is, once again, the long wrap-up. I mean, are we surprised? We shouldn't be surprised at this point. But I really enjoyed a lot of things that I read this month. I think that I'm glad that I stuck to reading a lot of comics because it is something that I love reading, and I'm not going to shy away from it anymore. I think I've been shying away from reading my comics because of the conversations where people talk about, oh, these don't count, you're reading a lot of these so your numbers are inflated. Like, who cares? It's just a medium that I love, I indulge in. I love the complexity of comics, so I'm going to continue to do so. I read some great fantasy stuff this month, so I'm going to continue that up within the next few months. It just was a great month. So in the comments down below, let me know what was your favorite book of February. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit that bell for notification. Interested in supporting this channel, the links will be down in the description box below. If you're interested in following me on social media, all of those links will be down in the description box below as well. And I'll be back with another video soon.